Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? I just finished reading NIGHTLAND RACER by Fenton Wood. This is my third foray into Fenton's writing. I've read a standalone of his called Hacking Galileo. It was awesome. And I've taken a few cracks at his Yankee Republic. I thought the first one was good, and I kind of got lost in the second one. And I just haven't restarted it again to try it out. This one, it's familiar and true to form for the other pieces of his writing that I've read. He's definitely a guy with a big imagination, and he also likes to write a lot of hard science into his books. With Hacking Galileo, it was a lot of astronomy stuff and engineering. With Yankee Republic, it had to do with radio. And in this one, it's a little bit of everything. So the premise is that there's this guy named Douglas. He's a race car driver. It's in the early 80s when this happens, but he's an alcoholic kind of washout. He's divorced. He doesn't really have a relationship with his kids. He's got two boys. And life just sucks. And then he gets a knock on his door. It's the president of the United States and the Secret Service, and they're there to personally recruit him for a super dangerous, stealthy mission. And he's like, oh, brother, I don't want to do this. But they're like, you get to drive a really cool car with a nuclear engine. He's like, all right, I want to do this. He's got to sober up and go to a secret facility and learn about this giant tank car and how it works and why he's the perfect man to drive it. Why does the government need him to do this? Well, 40 years after the Trinity tests at Alamogordo, there was a curious event. And we'll say that it punctured a hole through the fabric of reality and opened up a singularity. And ever since then, there's been this perfectly spherical, ever expanding zone spreading out of New Mexico and growing by like 10 or 20 feet per year. And since it's perfectly spherical, it goes high up into the atmosphere as well, so high that they can't really fly over it and look down inside it. And things that go in there get lost or get destroyed or killed, and there's weird stuff inside this zone, and they need him to drive this super-powered, armored nuclear car at massively high speeds to get to the center of this singularity and solve it before it not only consumes the United States, but also the entire world. From there, it's a little bit like Interstellar, where he goes into the singularity and he comes out on the other side, and like a whole bunch of time has passed, and he's a stranger in a strange land. And without getting too far into the details, the story becomes kind of like an Alice in Wonderland thing where, man, I just kept hearing this line from Bill Hader in Hot Rod where he says,
I was tripping balls pretty hard, man.
Yeah, that one right there. This book was an acid trip. It was just crazy. And the hard science kept popping up out of the ground like a groundhog, like a prairie dog, like a something animal, just poking up and be like, oh yeah, by the way, here's how this would physically work. And then it goes back to, and then Douglas had to go on a quest and drive the truck at 2 million miles per hour. And this I was like, holy crap. Like, I'll admit, having listened to the audiobook, there were a couple of sections where I was like, okay, I'm kind of lost on what the hell is happening here. It's just a trippy place. But before too long, Doug realizes that he hasn't traveled to some alien world. He's traveled like tens of millions of years into the future. It's Earth's future, and the singularity was like a rift in time. And now that he's there in the future, he's got to figure out what he can do to affect the past, close the singularity, save the world, and leave something of a meaningful inheritance to his children, and make sure that his ex-wife gets none of it. You know, typical successful divorced dad stuff. When I got to the end, there were plenty of like touching moments along the way. When I got to the end, I felt satisfied. There were pieces of the journey where I'm sure that I would have a better grasp of it if I read it again, but it was just so completely bonkers. It was, I said Alice in Wonderland. It was also a little bit like John Carter of Mars. It was just like, this is not a rational world where things make sense. There's like weird female insect species and weird male cyborg species, and there's an explanation for all of that. Like, but they're all descendants of humans, but weird stuff is going on. Like it's I'm being vague in that way that I tend to do for reviews. I'm being intentionally vague because there are like surprises in this story that it'll be fun for you to read and have them sprung on you without me giving the business away of it. I will say that in the first half hour of the audiobook, I was very frustrated because Fenton managed to use two ideas that I'm cooking up for two different stories that I'm going to write. One of them I'm actually in the process of writing, and he just like casually has these ideas too that he comes to. Like one of them being the that nukes open a rift in reality, and the other one being that the president personally shows up at a guy's house to recruit him for a job. Like both of those instances is like, frick. Still going to do my thing, going to do it my way. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, there's some synchronicity there, but the execution is going to be different for both of our stories. But overall, Nightland Racer, it was, pun intended, it was a heck of a ride. It was a lot of fun. It was pretty nuts. There were these little like wink, wink, nudge, nudge moments, these Easter eggs throughout that connected this future post-singularity world to our world, but not in like a hackneyed way. It was just like, oh, okay, I get what he's saying here. There was one line, I will say this, you will live in the pod, you will eat the bugs, you will wear the mask. That line persisted into the future, but almost completely devoid of the same context that it's been issued in the last 5 years. It's just like when the line landed, I was like, oh crap, there it is, that's funny. Wasn't something that I expected, but he delivered it really well and it landed well. The audiobook was narrated by virtual voice. That's a technology that's getting better. Still had some flaws, some hiccups here and there. Nothing that I took notes on. But overall, like I just kept thinking that this is the kind of book that the indie space really exists to nurture. Because while I often think of the indie space as a place where like people could write mainstream quality books, they just don't get published anymore because the mainstream isn't interested in people based on demographics or whatever. But the indie space is also where you go to write and publish a book that the mainstream just would not be able to get behind because it is a business and they've got a lot of mouths to feed. And the book, while very well executed, is going to be kind of niche and crazy and have a narrow interest and thus have a narrow market. AI as a production tool is going to kind of yield the same kind of books in the coming years. I've heard people talk about this where they say, well, I've got this book idea that I'm really passionate about and I know that I could do it well, and I know that not a whole lot of people would want to read it, so I can just use some AI tools to save me the time. I could still make the thing that I could uniquely make, but I'll use some AI tools to generate it, and if 100 people buy it over the life of the book, then I've made the story that I want to tell. Consumers will have varied mileage with that, but with how this all relates to Nightland Racer, this is the kind of book that I think really could only exist in the indie sphere. It's just that weird, but it's the kind of weird that is well executed, and that is rare enough that I would want to recommend it here. Where would I give it on the star scale? Where would I put it? Probably 3.5, not rounding down to 3, not rounding up to 4. It's a good 3.5. So maybe we just need to expand the scale to 10 and I can give it 7 stars. I don't know. Check out Nightland Racer by Fenton Wood. Content-wise, there was like 3 or 4 curse words here and there, and like I said, the main character Douglas is he's a recovering alcoholic, so he's a little bit coarse in his personal demeanor, but not grossly offensive or anything. There are some kind of horrific scenes that he sees when he's out in the Nightland. Mutated creatures and cyborgs that intentionally like chop people up and put computers in their brains. Like it's not overly grotesque, but it's there. So be advised. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.